The legal binder slid across the cold quartz of our kitchen island, stopping just inches from my hand. My husband, Marcus, didn't even look up from his phone. "It's just a formality, Eleanor," he said, the words clipped and final. "A simple trust to protect your hobbies. Just sign." Hobbies. 40 years of my life, of meticulously preserving history one fragile photograph at a time, reduced to a hobby. From the other side of the island, my daughter-in-law, Sloane, lowered her phone, pausing the day-in-the-life video she was filming for her thousands of followers. A perfect, practiced smile played on her lips. "Oh my God, Dad's right," she chimed in, her voice dripping with a kind of bright, cheerful poison. She glanced at me, her eyes sweeping over me as if I were a piece of antique furniture that didn't quite match her modern aesthetic. "It's not like old paper is a real asset. Not everything can be a brand, Eleanor." I looked from my husband, who treated my life's work like a tax write-off, to my son's wife, who saw it as bad content. They saw my archive, my entire legacy, as nothing more than a dusty liability holding back their net worth. They thought I was a relic from the past, too sentimental to understand the modern world of finance and branding. They were about to find out that someone who spends her life finding secrets buried in the past knows exactly where to look for lies in the present. But that moment, that casual dismissal of my entire life, wasn't the start of the fire. It was just the moment I finally saw the smoke. To understand how we reached that breaking point, you have to go back to the tiny, almost invisible crack I found hiding in a reflection. That reflection was in a photo I wasn't even supposed to be looking at so closely. It was a corporate job, a rush order for a big law firm in Chicago celebrating its centennial. They'd sent me a trove of digitized images from their history, and this one was from a glitzy awards dinner in 1987. Big hair, bigger shoulder pads, and a room full of people celebrating their success. My job was simple: clean up the digital noise, restore the color balance, and make the past look pristine again. It was routine work, the kind of project that paid the bills. I retreated to my workshop in the back of the house, the one place that was truly mine. The air in there always smells the same, a faint, dry scent of old paper and the clean, metallic hum of my equipment. It's a quiet place, a library of ghosts waiting to be brought back into the light. My main workstation is dominated by my archival scanner, a magnificent piece of German engineering that's my pride and joy. I remember the day the freight truck delivered it. The crate was huge, and the machine itself took up half the room. It cost almost every penny my mother had left me. Marcus had stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, that familiar, indulgent smile on his face, the one that always made me feel small. "An expensive toy for a dying medium, Ellie," he'd said, shaking his head. "You could have invested that in a solid mid-cap fund, something that actually grows." He didn't see the magic in it. He didn't see a tool for preserving truth. He saw a poor investment. For years, every time he called my work a hobby, the silent, powerful hum of that scanner was my only reply. It was the sound of my independence, an asset he could never understand, let alone value. Now, that very scanner was humming its steady song as I worked on the 1987 photograph. The image was grainy, a low-resolution scan of a fading print. My work is a kind of digital archaeology. You scrape away the noise, the dust of decades, the decay of pixels, until the original truth of the moment reveals itself. I was focusing on the main subject, a partner accepting an award, when my professional eye caught something out of place, a flaw. A faint distortion in the dark glass of another framed award hanging on the wall behind him. To anyone else it would be nothing, a smudge, a bit of lens flare, but to me it was a sentence with a word spelled wrong. My curiosity, the very engine of my profession, took over. It was a compulsion. I couldn't leave it alone. I drew a small selection box around the reflection, isolating it from the rest of the image. The reflection was tiny, barely 100 pixels wide, a meaningless blur of color. I started the slow work of clarification. I ran a denoising filter first, then a sharpening algorithm, layering them carefully, coaxing the hidden details out of the digital ether. My mind was somewhere else entirely. I was thinking about dinner, about the condescending way Marcus had patted my hand after Sloane's remark. "She's just from a different generation, Ellie," he would probably say later. "They think in terms of brands and analytics. Don't take it personally." He was always smoothing things over, managing my feelings like a volatile stock, ensuring I remained a stable, predictable part of his portfolio. The first pass of the algorithm finished. The blur resolved into vague shapes. It wasn't lens flare. It looked like two people. I leaned closer, my heart giving a little thump of interest. This was the fun part of the job, finding these little hidden stories. I ran the sharpening sequence again, increasing the intensity just slightly. You have to be careful not to create artifacts, false details that look real. My entire career was built on telling the difference between the authentic and the fake. The shapes began to take on more definition. A curve of a shoulder, the line of an arm, a swatch of dark blonde hair. My breath caught in my throat. Sloane's hair was that exact shade, a color she paid a fortune for at a salon in the city. No, I told myself, don't be ridiculous. It was a trick of the light, my mind playing games, connecting dots that weren't there because of a stupid comment made in the kitchen. I almost closed the file, almost dismissed it as a flight of fancy. But I didn't. I am nothing if not thorough. I ran the final, most intensive clarification algorithm. It's a slow process, the computer meticulously analyzing each pixel and rebuilding the image based on the surrounding data. I sat back, the hum of the scanner filling the silence. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%, 30%, 70%, and then it was done. The image that snapped into focus on my screen was small and slightly distorted from the curve of the glass, but it was horrifyingly, undeniably clear. The blur had sharpened into a line, the line into a shape. It was a face, Sloane's face, tilted back, her eyes closed in a moment of pleasure, and then the other face, my husband's, leaning in, his lips pressed against hers. The smudge wasn't a smudge, it was a kiss. The photo was taken at a global finance summit in Atlanta that Marcus had attended 3 months ago, alone. A deep, profound cold started in my stomach and spread through my entire body, a kind of internal frost. The quiet hum of my workshop suddenly felt deafening. The smell of old paper felt like the smell of decay. I stared at the tiny image, this ghost from the past that had just destroyed my present. 40 years of marriage, of shared memories, of building a life, all of it felt like a photograph I had spent my life restoring, only to find out at the very end that it was a forgery. My first instinct was the one they expected me to have. The tears, the rage, the heartbreak, but it passed in a wave, leaving behind something hard and clear. I looked at my scanner, the one he called a toy. The hobby he'd dismissed had just given me the one thing he couldn't manage or spin or explain away. The truth. My hands were perfectly steady as I moved the mouse. I saved the enhanced image, the tiny, damning reflection, to my desktop. I created a new folder. I didn't name it Evidence or The Bastards. I gave it a cold corporate name, a name Marcus would understand. I typed it out, letter by letter, Asset Evaluation. I opened the folder. It was empty, for now. A quiet digital space waiting to be filled. My face was calm, my breathing even. I was no longer a wife. I was an archivist. And I had a new collection to build. I whispered it to the silence of the room, a promise to myself. Let's see what else is hiding in the shadows. The best place to hunt for things hiding in the shadows is in the one place your target feels safest. For Marcus, that was his home office. He called it his command center. It was his temple of modernity, a sleek glass and chrome room where he wrestled with markets and built digital empires. It was also where he took his most private calls. And I needed to be a fly on that wall. The perfect opportunity came 3 days later, his 65th birthday. I insisted on hosting a small dinner. Just the 4 of us. Our son, Chase, arrived looking tired and drawn. He worked as an environmental lawyer for a nonprofit, a career choice that Marcus publicly called noble and privately called a complete waste of a Harvard education. Chase kissed my cheek and gave me a weary smile. He could always sense the atmospheric pressure in our house, the invisible storm fronts that gathered before a fight. Sloane, on the other hand, swept in like she owned the place, which, I was beginning to realize, she fully intended to. She was wearing a cream-colored silk jumpsuit that probably cost more than my first car. "Eleanor, the place looks vintage," she said, her eyes already redecorating, tearing down the warm, lived-in comfort I'd spent decades building. We sat down to dinner in the formal dining room, a room Marcus had updated last year on Sloane's advice. He'd replaced my warm oak table with a slab of white marble that felt like an operating table. The meal was a quiet affair, punctuated by the clinking of silverware. Chase tried to make small talk about a case he was working on, but Marcus just grunted and checked stock futures on his Apple Watch under the table. Then Sloane, swirling a glass of expensive Cabernet, launched her little grenade. "You know, I was talking to a designer," she said to no one in particular. "And he said a full gut remodel of this level could double the property value. This whole place needs to be optimized for a modern portfolio. More value, less sentiment." I placed my fork down on the plate. The small, sharp sound cut through the silence. Chase shot his wife a warning look, but she just smiled, oblivious. I saw it then. It wasn't just my archive they saw as clutter. It was me. I was the sentiment holding back the value. I took a slow sip of water, my hand steady, and then I smiled back at her. "What a forward-thinking idea, dear. Now who wants dessert? After that, it's time for presents." After a slice of the ridiculously overpriced cake Sloane had brought from a trendy bakery, I went to the sideboard. "For you, Marcus," I said, placing a heavy, cloth-wrapped box in front of him. He looked genuinely surprised. We hadn't really exchanged thoughtful gifts in years. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a stunning desk clock. It was a reproduction of a 1920 Art Deco timepiece, all polished brass and sharp geometric lines, with a heavy marble base. It looked like something that would sit on the desk of a Rockefeller. "Ellie, this is beautiful," he said, and for a moment, the surprise in his voice sounded real. "Where did you find it?" "An antique dealer I work with." I lied smoothly. "I know how much you appreciate classic design. I thought it would look perfect in your office." He was beaming. It was the perfect gift because it fed his ego. It was an object of status, something that looked like old money, a tangible symbol of the power he craved. He failed to notice the seams weren't quite right for a true antique, or that the base was just a little too thick. He saw what he wanted to see. "It's perfect," he declared. "Let's put it in there right now." He led the way to his command center. The room was aglow with the light of 3 massive monitors displaying dizzying charts and numbers. A sleek black Peloton bike stood in the corner like a silent, judgmental sculpture. He cleared a spot on his vast desk, right between a photo of him shaking hands with a senator and a stack of financial reports. He placed the clock down with a satisfying thud. It looked magnificent, a piece of timeless elegance in a room of cold, transient data. "See?" he said, turning to me with that indulgent smile. "This is what I'm talking about. A classic, a real asset." I just smiled back. Chase and Sloane came to admire it. While their backs were turned, my phone in my hand, I pulled up the discreet app I had installed. My thumb hovered over the icon. It was a simple black circle with a small white sound wave in the middle. I pressed it. A tiny light on the back of the clock, no bigger than a pinprick and hidden deep in the filigree, blinked green once, then went dark. The trap was set. The Trojan horse was inside the gates. Later that night, as I washed the dishes, Marcus came up behind me. "Thank you for the clock, Ellie," he said, giving my shoulder a light pat. "It was the kind of gesture you give a dog who's done a simple trick. And thank you for being so reasonable about the paperwork. You're finally starting to see the big picture." I turned off the water and dried my hands, my movements slow and deliberate. I looked at him, at the man I had shared my life with for 4 decades, and felt nothing but a profound, chilling calm. The calm of an archivist who has just acquired a new, fascinating specimen and is about to begin the long, patient work of cataloging its secrets. "I'm always trying to see the big picture, Marcus," I said. And in my pocket, my phone was a silent, solid weight, waiting patiently for the voices to emerge from the shadows. I didn't have to wait long. Those voices emerged from the shadows just before midnight. I lay perfectly still in our bed, the weight of the down comforter a heavy shroud. My breathing was slow and even, a practiced rhythm of sleep I had perfected over 40 years of sharing a bed with Marcus. He was beside me, a warm, solid presence, snoring softly. To him, I was just his wife, sleeping soundly, oblivious. But beneath the covers, my left hand was clenched around my phone, a single earbud snaked up to my ear, a tiny wire feeding me the sounds of my own destruction. The phone was cold against my palm, a stark contrast to the warmth of the bed. I heard the faint creak of a floorboard from the hallway, then the soft, almost inaudible click of his office door opening and closing. He was in. I waited. A few minutes later, another set of lighter, quicker footsteps followed. Hers. The first sound through the earbud was the clink of ice cubes in a heavy glass, followed by the glug of liquid. Scotch, probably. Marcus's victory drink. Easy on that. Sloane's voice came through, sharp and clear. It was stripped of the breathy, aspirational tone she used for her followers. This was her real voice, cold, ambitious, and impatient. We need you sharp for the Ethelred meeting. Relax, Marcus's voice rumbled, closer to the microphone. The clock was doing its job perfectly. The hard part's over. She's finally caved on the trust. She's too tired to fight anymore. 40 years of organizing dusty paper will do that to a person. My eyes were wide open in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. I felt nothing. No tears, no surge of anger. It was as if I were in my workshop, listening to a degraded audio file, my only job to isolate the signal from the noise. And the signal was coming through with perfect, devastating clarity. Are you sure the documents are solid? Sloane asked. She's not stupid, Marcus. She's just analog. The documents are a work of art, he boasted. They give me full authority to manage her assets for optimized growth. Once she signs, I can legally declare the archive commercially non-viable. It's a liability, not an asset. It costs a fortune in climate control and insurance, with zero return. It's a simple business decision. A simply business decision. He was talking about my life's work. He was talking about the letters from soldiers who never came home, the first-generation prints from photographers who died in obscurity, the family histories I had pieced together from faded, forgotten scraps. He was talking about liquidating ghosts. And then? Sloane pressed. And then, Marcus said, his voice dropping with satisfaction, we transfer the entire collection, the physicals and the digital scans, to your LLC for the nominal price of $1 to cover the archival and disposal costs. It's all perfectly legal. We're just taking a non-performing asset off her hands. A bitter, metallic taste filled my mouth. My son's wife and my husband, turning my workshop into a boardroom, turning my legacy into a line item in their hostile takeover of my life. I heard the rustle of papers. I still don't get why we have to go through all this, Sloane complained. It's just a dusty fire hazard holding back our net worth. Why not just sell it off piece by piece? There it was, the phrase from the outline of their lives, spoken aloud in the dark. It didn't feel like an insult. It felt like a diagnosis. That's all they could see. Not history, not humanity, not truth. Just a fire hazard. Patience. Marcus chided her, his tone now a mixture of lover and mentor. We liquidate it as a single collection to Ethelred. It's cleaner, faster, and gives us the capital we need to launch our own fund. Think bigger, Sloane. This isn't about selling off old junk at a garage sale. This is about leveraging an undervalued asset to create real wealth. Her sentimentality is our opportunity. I thought of my archival scanner then, humming away in the other room. The machine he'd called a toy, a bad investment. That machine was my truth detector, and it was humming a song of war. She's lived in the past for 40 years, Marcus said, and his voice was so close, so full of condescending pity, that I felt a tremor of actual rage. She won't know what hit her until the liquidation is complete. By then, the money will be clean, the assets will be gone, and we'll be on a flight to Monaco. And she'll just be a sad old woman with an empty room. I didn't flinch. I lay there and absorbed every word, every cold, calculated syllable. I was no longer a wife in her bed. I was an archivist. And this was a primary source. This was the unvarnished truth, recorded for posterity. My thumb moved, pressing the record button on the app. The little red icon glowed under the blankets. The conversation shifted to their future, to the trips they would take, the brand deals Sloane would secure, the life they would build on the ashes of mine. I listened until the ice had melted in their glasses, until their voices grew tired and their plotting subsided. I heard the office door open. I shut my eyes, my face a perfect mask of sleep. Marcus's footsteps were heavy in the hall. The mattress dipped as he got into bed beside me. He sighed, a sound of deep contentment. He rolled over, his back to me, and within minutes, the soft rhythm of his snoring filled the room once more. He was sleeping the sound, dreamless sleep of a man who believed he had won. He had no idea that just inches away, the woman he thought he'd defeated was wide awake, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm, like the patient hum of a machine designed to bring the truth, no matter how ugly, into the light. The file was saved. The collection was growing. That digital file, glowing red on my phone, was the heart of my collection, but a recording of a conspiracy is just a story. To truly dismantle their plan, I needed something tangible. I needed a weapon. I needed proof. And 2 days later, at the breakfast table, Marcus delivered it right into my hands. He came into the kitchen, already dressed in one of his sharp, tailored suits, a leather-bound binder tucked under his arm. He poured himself a coffee, black, the way he always took it, and sat down opposite me. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He just slid the binder across the table again, the same one from before. This time, however, his arrogance had a new edge of impatience. He was a CEO closing a deal, and I was the last, tedious signature he needed. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and firm, "we need to get this done. The Ethelred people are interested in a preliminary valuation. I need your signature to move forward." I didn't look at the binder. I looked at him. I studied the confident set of his jaw, the slight, dismissive tap of his pen against the leather. He saw a tired, analog woman who was finally being sensible. I saw a criminal who was getting sloppy. "Of course, Marcus," I said, my voice soft and agreeable. I ran my hand over the expensive leather. "It's just so much fine print. You know how my eyes get. Would it be too much trouble to have your assistant email me the digital file? I'd like to read it on my tablet, where I can make the font bigger." It was the perfect excuse, the request of a woman who was out of her depth with technology, who needed a bigger font to understand the complex world of men and money. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by that familiar, indulgent smile. He thought I was stalling, but in a harmless, doddering way. "Whatever you need, Ellie," he said, patting my hand. "I'll have it sent over this morning. Our lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, drafted it, so it's all standard boilerplate. But take all the time you need. Mr. Abernathy." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. Bill Abernathy had been our family lawyer for 30 years. He drafted our wills, handled the sale of my parents' home, and sent us a Christmas card every year with a picture of his golden retrievers. Invoking his name was meant to reassure me, to wrap their fraud in a blanket of trust and familiarity. It was also his biggest mistake. An hour later, an email arrived. The file was attached. I carried my coffee back to my workshop, closed the door, and sat down at my workstation. The room was quiet except for the low hum of my scanner, a steady, reassuring sound. It was my truth detector, and it was time to put it to work. I didn't open the document to read it. The words didn't matter. The words were the lie. I was looking for the story underneath the story. I imported the file directly into my forensic software. This was the part of my job I loved the most, the digital sleuthing. Every digital file has a history, a hidden birth certificate called metadata. It tells you who created it, when it was created, and most importantly, what machine it was born on. It's a digital fingerprint, and it's almost impossible to fake if you don't know what you're doing. I ran the analysis. Lines of code scrolled down a black window on my screen. It felt like developing a photograph in a darkroom, watching as the invisible image slowly emerges from the chemicals. The program finished its work, and the document's metadata appeared in a neat, organized table. Creation date: October 5th, 2025, 11:43 p.m., the night of the birthday dinner, the night I'd planted the clock. They must have drafted it right after I'd gone to bed. Last modified, October 8th, 2025, 9:12 a.m. About an hour before Marcus had brought it to me, they were fine-tuning their weapon. Then I looked at the line that mattered, the line that would change everything. Author: Sloan Anderson. Device: Sloan's MacBook Pro 16. My breath hitched. There it was. Not Abernathy and Sons Law, not paralegal services. Sloan Anderson, my daughter-in-law, the influencer, the brand expert, the author of my financial ruin. The document wasn't just a lie, it was a forgery. And they had been stupid enough to leave the creator's name right there in the digital DNA of the file. I took a screenshot, my movements precise and calm. I saved it to the Asset Evaluation folder. It was Exhibit C, irrefutable. But I needed one more thing. I needed to close the loop. I picked up my phone and dialed Bill Abernathy's office. His secretary put me right through. "Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise." His warm, gravelly voice boomed through the phone. "How are you and Marcus doing?" "We're wonderful, Bill. Thank you for asking," I said, injecting a note of friendly warmth into my voice. "I'm calling about something small. I was just reviewing our estate plan, and I had a quick question about the trust we set up for Chase. I asked him a meaningless question about a tax clause, something I already knew the answer to. He answered it patiently, then chuckled. You know, it's good you're looking at these things. It's always smart to stay on top of it. Funny, I was just thinking I should give you and Marcus a call to schedule your annual review. We haven't spoken since the spring. And there it was. He hadn't spoken to Marcus in months. He knew nothing about a new trust. He knew nothing about the binder on my kitchen table. That would be lovely, Bill, I said. Let's plan on it. Give my love to Mary and the dogs. I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair. The quiet hum of the scanner filled the room. Marcus was a fool. He and Sloan were amateurs playing a professional's game. They thought they were financial masterminds, but they couldn't even cover their digital tracks. He had just handed a forgery expert a forged document. The game was no longer his. It was mine. I looked at the screen, at the damning line of text, and then at the growing collection of files in my secret folder. Time to build the archive, I said to the silence. And I got back to work. My work for the next 4 days wasn't about restoration, it was about demolition. I was building a different kind of archive, not of the distant past, but of the immediate, ugly present. My workshop, once my sanctuary of quiet concentration, became a war room. The house itself faded into the background. I barely slept. I lived on coffee from the old Mr. Coffee machine in the corner, the one Marcus always wanted to replace with some chrome monstrosity, and on the cold remains of a Costco rotisserie chicken I'd bought days ago, eaten standing over the sink. The steady, low hum of my archival scanner was my only companion. It was the soundtrack to my mission, a constant reminder of the expensive toy that had become my greatest weapon. Every time I heard its fan kick on, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Marcus had funded his own undoing, and he didn't even know it. I began with the audio from the clock. I didn't just listen to the hours of tape, I became a stenographer. I put on my best noise-canceling headphones, poured a cup of black coffee, and transcribed their entire conspiracy, word for word. I listened to my husband's voice, so full of condescending pity, as he called me a sad old woman who'd lived in the past for 40 years. I typed the words, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I felt no pain, only a cold, clarifying rage. Then I listened to Sloane's sharp, impatient voice, complaining that my life's work was a dusty fire hazard holding back our net worth. I saved that particular audio clip as a separate file. I labeled it Exhibit A, Asset Devaluation Strategy. I took their bloodless corporate jargon and turned it into indictment. The rest of their conversation, their plans to use an LLC, their boasts about Monaco One clipped, and labeled each one with the precision of a prosecuting attorney. Exhibit B, Conspiracy to Commit Fraud. Next, I turned to the finances. This was a world Marcus thought I knew nothing about, but a wife of 40 years knows things. She knows the password to the family computer is the name of the dog we had when Chase was a boy. She knows her husband is arrogant enough to use that same computer for his personal banking because he assumes she'd never have the curiosity to look. I found what I was looking for in less than 10 minutes. A series of wire transfers, small at first, then growing larger, from Marcus's personal investment account to a holding company I'd never heard of. The company name was SA Creative Ventures. Sloan Anderson. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. It was beautiful. I took high-resolution screenshots of every single transaction, a clear, undeniable money trail. I saved them in a subfolder labeled Financials. Then I assembled my masterpiece. I opened a new file, not a Word document, but a secure, encrypted portfolio program I used for my most sensitive client work. The title page was simple, stark white text on a black background. Project Nightingale, a due diligence file. I chose the name carefully. Nightingale, the songbird, the teller of truths in the dead of night, and due diligence, the two words every corporate predator fears the most. It was their language, weaponized and aimed directly at their hearts. The portfolio was a work of art, if I do say so myself. It was organized with ruthless efficiency. The first page was an executive summary, a single paragraph outlining a conspiracy to defraud an asset holder through document forgery and illicit financial transfers. It was cold, professional, and devastating. From there, everything was hyperlinked. You could click on the phrase illicit financial transfers, and it would take you directly to the screenshots of the wire transfers. You could click on Document Forgery, and it would open a new window showing a side-by-side comparison. On the left, the metadata from their fraudulent document clearly showing Sloane's name. On the right, a sworn, notarized affidavit from our lawyer, Bill Abernathy, stating he had not drafted nor seen any such document. I had called him back and, without revealing the details, told him I suspected my signature was being sought for a document he didn't prepare. He was furious and sent the affidavit over by courier that same afternoon. The crown jewel of the collection was the audio. Clicking on a simple play button would launch the audio file of them in his office, their voices crisp and clear, plotting my demise. And right below it, a link to the enhanced photograph from the 1987 awards dinner, the tiny reflection of their kiss that had started it all. The genesis of their lie, presented in perfect, high-resolution clarity. It was an open and shut case, an entire lifetime of betrayal condensed into a single, elegant, and absolutely unbreakable digital file. It wasn't a revenge scrapbook. It was a corporate assassination tool. On the fourth night, I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face. The house was dark and silent. Outside, the world slept, unaware of the quiet war being waged in my small workshop. I looked at the finished portfolio on my screen. It was the most important archive I had ever built. It was the truth, codified and weaponized. The archive was complete. The poison pill was coded. All that was left was to choose the time and place for them to swallow it. And the perfect place for them to swallow it wasn't my home, a place of sentiment and memory. It had to be their world. A cold, sterile boardroom, high above the city, where deals are made and lives are measured in profit and loss. It had to be a place where their humiliation would be professional, public, and absolute. The next morning, I found Marcus in the kitchen, already on a conference call, pacing back and forth in front of the glass doors that led to the patio. He was barking orders about derivatives and leveraging assets, a language designed to intimidate and exclude. I waited patiently, sipping my tea, until he finally hung up. I didn't wait for him to bring it up. I walked over to the quartz island, where the leather binder still sat like a silent accusation, and I placed my hand on it. "Marcus," I said, my voice calm and even. He turned, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He was used to me avoiding the subject, avoiding him. My directness put him on the back foot. "I've thought about it," I continued, looking directly at him. "You're right. I've been overly sentimental. An archive doesn't pay the bills." He stared at me, his expression a mixture of suspicion and dawning triumph. He was like a fisherman who had been waiting for a nibble for days and suddenly felt the line go taut. "Ellie," he began, his voice cautious, "I'm glad you're seeing. I've read the documents." I cut him off smoothly. "And I'm ready to sign." His face broke into a wide, relieved smile. It was the smile of a man who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. He walked over and took my other hand, squeezing it. It felt like being touched by a stranger. "That's my girl," he said, his voice thick with condescension. "I knew you'd come around. This is the best thing for everyone. It unlocks so much value." Sloane chose that moment to glide into the room, dressed in expensive athletic wear, a green smoothie in her hand. She stopped short, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. She looked from Marcus's beaming face to mine, her eyes narrowing. "Your mother has agreed to sign the papers," Marcus announced to her, puffing out his chest. "She's ready to move the business into the 21st century." Sloane's perfectly sculpted lips curved into a slow, knowing smirk. It was a look of pure, unadulterated victory. She took a delicate sip of her smoothie, her eyes never leaving mine. "Wow, Eleanor. That's very financially literate of you." I ignored her. I was focused on the final move. The checkmate. "I have one condition," I said, my voice still quiet, still reasonable. Marcus's smile tightened slightly. "A condition?" "It's not about the money," I said quickly, playing the part I knew they expected. "It's just that archive is my life's work. 40 years. I can't just sign it away on a kitchen island like it's a permission slip for a field trip. If I'm going to hand it over, I want to do it properly. I want to meet the people from Aethelred Acquisitions. I want to be in the room when the deal is done. I want to look them in the eye and pass the torch, so to speak." I let the last few words hang in the air, dripping with the kind of outdated sentimentality they so despised. I was giving them exactly the Eleanor they wanted to see, the emotional, analog woman who cared more about ceremony than cents on the dollar. They exchanged a quick, silent glance. I could practically hear their thoughts. Let the old woman have her moment. What harm can it do? It was a pathetic, harmless request. It was perfect. Marcus's smile returned, broader than ever. He was practically magnanimous. Of course, Ellie. Of course. That's a wonderful idea. It's only right. The meeting is on Friday, 3 o'clock, at their downtown offices. He was so proud, so delighted with his own cleverness. He thought he was humoring me, giving me one last, pointless moment of dignity before he took everything. He reached out and patted my arm, a gesture of finality. You're finally being sensible, Ellie. This is for the best. Sloane walked past me, placing her empty smoothie glass in the sink with a soft clink. As she passed, she leaned in, her voice a low whisper meant only for me. See? She murmured, her breath smelling of kale and victory. All it took was a little financial education. I just stood there, my hand still resting on the binder. I didn't say a word. I let their confidence, their arrogance wash over me. They thought the game was over. They thought they had won. They had no idea they had just RSVP'd to their own execution, and I had already built the gallows. The gallows I built for them wasn't made of wood and rope, it was made of glass and steel, and it was 42 stories high, with a panoramic view of the city. On Friday, I didn't go to the meeting. At 2:45, I was sitting in a worn armchair at a Starbucks across the street, a lukewarm cup of Earl Grey tea in my hands. From my vantage point, I had a perfect, godlike view of the Aethelred Acquisitions boardroom. It was like watching a silent movie unfold in a pristine glass box. The actors were all there, playing their parts. The team of executives, all sharp suits and severe haircuts, sat on one side of a ridiculously long mahogany table. They exuded a bored, predatory stillness, like sharks waiting for the chum to be thrown in the water. And then there were my two stars. Marcus was holding court, leaning forward, his hands clasped, radiating confidence and authority. He was selling them a story. He was selling them my story, repackaged as a financial opportunity. Sloane sat beside him, a perfect picture of the modern corporate wife. She was nodding at the right moments, her posture impeccable, a small triumphant smile playing on her lips. She looked like she was already spending the money. They were so comfortable, so completely at home in this world of abstract value and ruthless transactions. They thought they were in their element. They had no idea they were in my killing jar. My laptop was open on the small table in front of me, its screen dark. I didn't need to look at it. The work was already done. The email was drafted, the recipient list triple-checked. It included every executive in that room, the entire Aethelred board of directors, and one other person, our son Chase. The email was scheduled to send at exactly 3 p.m. All I had to do was watch. The steam from my tea curled into the air. I thought about my workshop, about the quiet, steady hum of my archival scanner. For 40 years, that machine and I had done one thing. We'd looked past the surface of things to find the truth underneath. We'd peeled back the layers of time, decay, and deception to reveal the stark, unchangeable facts of a moment. A birth, a death, a marriage, a betrayal. My Project Nightingale file was just another archive, the last and most important one I would ever build, and its public exhibition was about to begin. I glanced at the clock on my phone. 2:59. Across the street, in the glass box, Marcus pushed a single piece of paper, the final signature page, no doubt to the center of the table. The lead executive, a man with silver hair and a face like a clenched fist, reached for a pen. They were smiling, they were shaking hands, they were celebrating a deal built on a foundation of lies. My phone screen changed. Dries Middags. And then it happened. It was beautiful in its silent, digital precision. In the boardroom 42 floors above the city, every single person flinched at the same time. A symphony of quiet chimes, the gentle ding of a dozen notifications arriving in perfect unison. Heads snapped down to look at phones, at laptops, at tablets. I could picture the email as it appeared on their screens. A clean, simple message from an address they didn't recognize. My address. The subject line was all they needed to see. Subject: Due Diligence. Project Nightingale. It was a line of text, but it was also a declaration of war. It was a corporate landmine clicking under their feet. I watched as the lead executive, the silver-haired shark, read the subject line on his phone. His hand, which had been reaching for the pen, froze mid-air. His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold, professional curiosity. He tapped open the email. There was only a single secure link. From my chair in the coffee shop, I saw the light from their screens illuminate their faces. I could see the subtle shifts in their posture. First, confusion. Then, a dawning, horrified comprehension. A younger executive on the end actually put his hand to his mouth. Across the table, Marcus and Sloane hadn't looked at their own phones yet. They were watching the executives, their triumphant smiles fading into nervous bewilderment. "Is there a problem?" I could almost hear Marcus asking, his voice still full of swagger. The silver-haired executive didn't answer him. He held up a single, silencing hand, his eyes glued to his screen. He clicked the link. The archive was now open for business. The trap was sprung. The trap wasn't a sound. It was a silence. A deep, profound quiet that fell over the boardroom as 12 high-powered executives, my husband and my daughter-in-law, all stared into the abyss I had opened for them on their screens. From my perch in the Starbucks, I watched the blue glow of their devices become the only source of light on their faces. They were no longer in a boardroom, they were in my archive. And the ghosts I'd spent my life preserving were about to speak. The first to react was one of the younger executives, a man who looked like he'd been born in a Brooks Brothers suit. He was reading the executive summary, the cold, concise paragraph that laid out the entire conspiracy. He physically recoiled, pulling his head back from his laptop as if it had bitten him. He loosened his tie, a gesture of pure instinctual panic. Across the table, Marcus and Sloane were still watching the room, not their own devices. Their confident smiles had been replaced by tight, nervous lines. They looked like party hosts who had just realized no one was laughing at their jokes. They could feel the temperature in the room plummeting, but they didn't know why. Then the silver-haired executive, the man in charge, slowly scrolled down. He clicked on the hyperlink for the forged document analysis. I saw his jaw tighten, a muscle flexing in his cheek. He was a man who had built a career on spotting risk, and he was now looking at a 5-alarm fire of fraud and liability burning right on his mahogany table. He didn't look up at Marcus. He didn't have to. His contempt was a palpable force, even through 2 panes of glass in a city street. Finally, Marcus, his own bravado turning to ash in his mouth, looked down at his phone. I watched him tap the link. I watched him read the words he'd spoken in the dark, transcribed and presented as evidence. I watched as his eyes darted to the screenshots of the wire transfers to Sloane's shell company. I watched as 40 years of carefully constructed self-importance crumbled. It wasn't a loud explosion. It was a silent implosion. It was like watching a building's foundation turn to dust. The confident posture, the commanding presence, it all just collapsed inward. He sank back in his chair, his face the color of old parchment. Sloane was next. Her reaction was different. It wasn't about the money or the fraud. It was about the image. Her eyes flew around the room, meeting the cold, disgusted stares of the executives. Her brand, her carefully curated identity of success and aspirational living, was being deleted in real time. Her face, usually a mask of practiced poise, was now a canvas of raw, naked panic. She looked at Marcus for help, but he was a ghost, a hollowed-out man staring at his own ruin. Then came the kill shot. The silver-haired executive calmly reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a pair of sleek wireless earbuds. He placed one in his right ear. It was a gesture of immense power, a signal that he was now listening to something far more important than anyone in that room. He clicked the play button on the audio file I'd labeled Exhibit A. He didn't need to hear much. I saw him listening, his expression unchanging, for perhaps 15 seconds. That would have been long enough to hear Marcus call me a sad old woman. Long enough to hear Sloane call my life's work a dusty fire hazard. Long enough to hear their plans for Monaco. He removed the earbud with a slow, deliberate motion. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. That's not how real power works. He simply stood up. That single, silent action was the guillotine falling. He took the unsigned contract from the center of the table, folded it once, and slid it into his expensive leather briefcase. He snapped the clasps shut. The 2 sharp clicks were the only sounds in the funereal silence of the room. He turned, not to Marcus, but to his team. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Without a word, his entire team stood up in unison. They gathered their belongings, their movements crisp and efficient. They didn't look at Marcus or Sloane. They were no longer potential partners. They were a contamination. They filed out of the room, a silent procession of judgment, leaving a vacuum of cold, echoing silence in their wake. The silver-haired man was the last to leave. At the door, he paused for a moment, his back to the room. He didn't turn around. He just said 2 words, his voice quiet but carrying the brutal finality of a judge's gavel. "Meeting's over." Then he was gone. Marcus and Sloane were left alone in the glass box, 2 statues in a museum of their own failure. The long table stretched between them like a vast, empty desert. The half-full glasses of sparkling water, the untouched pens, the useless, unsigned contract, it was the debris of a shipwreck. Marcus was slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. Sloane was frozen, staring at her own distorted reflection in the dark, silent screen of her laptop. Across the street, I took a slow, final sip of my now-cold tea. The taste was bitter but clean. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel hatred. I felt the quiet satisfaction of a completed project, the peace of a perfectly restored photograph. The archive was closed. My work here was done. I closed my laptop, slid it into my bag, and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving them to the silence they had earned. I left them to that silence, the silence they had built, lie by lie, transaction by transaction. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The fallout from a silent explosion is still devastation, and I knew it would be swift and total. The assets they had tried so desperately to liquidate were not mine, but their own, their marriage, their careers, their honor. The first tremor hit them before they even left the boardroom. The elevator doors slid open, but it wasn't a building employee coming to clear the room. It was my son. I wasn't there, but Chase told me about it later, his voice flat and hollowed out, as if he were describing a scene from a movie he'd been forced to watch. He said he stood in the doorway for a long moment, just looking at them. At his father, a deflated, gray-faced man lost in an expensive suit, and at his wife, her perfect makeup now a cracked mask of desperation. In his hand, Chase was holding a simple, navy blue duffel bag. It was the one Sloane always took for weekend trips to the Hamptons. Sloane was the first to speak, her voice a reedy, pathetic whisper. "Chase, baby. I can explain." He didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on our husband, on his father. "Was any of it real?" he asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question, the kind a child asks when they first learn the truth about Santa Claus. Marcus just shook his head, mumbling something about market pressures, about portfolios, about a world Chase couldn't possibly understand. It was the last, sputtering gasp of his lifelong arrogance. Chase just looked at him, his face etched with a kind of profound, weary pity. Then, he turned to his wife, the woman he had promised to love and cherish, and he gently placed the duffel bag on the floor at her feet. The soft thud echoed in the vast, silent room. "You should go," he said. And that was it. Not a fight, not a scream, just a quiet, irrevocable eviction from his life. The public consequences were just as clean and just as brutal. By Monday morning, a headline on the Wall Street Journal's website read, "Veteran wealth manager Marcus Vance fired amid fraud allegations. SEC launches investigation." His name, once a symbol of financial wizardry, was now a byword for disgrace. The empire he'd spent a lifetime building was dismantled in a single news cycle. Sloane's downfall was more modern, and perhaps even more cruel. Her carefully curated social media empire, her brand of aspirational authenticity, was torched. Her comment sections, once filled with fawning praise and heart emojis, became a digital pillory. People were merciless. They posted snippets from the audio file I had released. Under a photo of her posing with a $1,000 handbag, someone wrote, "Is that part of your strategy for leveraging undervalued assets?" Under a video of her giving life advice, a commenter asked, "What are your top 3 tips for dealing with a dusty fire hazard that's holding back your net worth?" Her brand wasn't just damaged, it was a joke. In the world of influencers, there is no greater sin. She deleted her accounts within 24 hours, vanishing into the digital ether she had once so masterfully commanded. A week later, I came home to find Chase in Marcus's home office. The room had been stripped bare. The Peloton was gone, the massive monitors were unplugged, and Marcus was packing the contents of his desk into a sad little cardboard box. Chase was leaning against the doorframe. his arms crossed, watching. He had come to say one last thing. I stood in the hallway, hidden from view, and listened. "I read her file," Chase said, his voice quiet but hard as steel. "All of it. I listened to every word. The whole time, all I could think about was her workshop. The smell of old paper. The way she can hold a photograph from 100 years ago and tell you the story of the people in it like she knew them." Marcus didn't look up. He just kept placing cheap plastic trophies and framed photos into the box. "Her whole life," Chase continued, his voice shaking with a quiet, righteous fury, "her entire life is about preserving truth, about finding it, protecting it, honoring it. And you tried to build an empire on lies. You took the one truly authentic thing in your life and you tried to liquidate it." He pushed himself off the doorframe and took a step into the room. "Look what's left of it," he said. He gestured around the empty office, at the bare walls, the unplugged wires, the pathetic little box of memories. He wasn't just talking about the room, he was talking about everything. Their marriage, their family, their name, all of it, liquidated. And then, without another word, my son turned and walked away, leaving his father alone with the wreckage. He walked out of the house that day with his entire empire in a single cardboard box. And in the silence that followed, a quiet that felt clean and full of possibility, I finally had the space to begin my own restoration. 6 months later, the sunlight streaming into my workshop felt different. It was warmer, brighter. The room itself had changed. I'd knocked down a wall, taking over what used to be Marcus's home office. Where his sterile glass desk and Peloton once stood, there were now long, wooden work tables, state-of-the-art light boxes, and the quiet, focused energy of half a dozen university students. I'd partnered with the local college's history department to offer an archival studies program. My hobby had become a legacy. The air no longer smelled of just dry paper and processing chemicals. It smelled of fresh coffee, of new ideas, of a future being built by the next generation. The low, steady hum of my archival scanner was still there, but now it was joined by the soft chatter of my students as they worked, their young faces bent in concentration over faded photographs and brittle letters. Chase was at a desk in the corner, the one where Marcus used to sign his multi-million-dollar deals. My son wasn't managing derivatives, he was managing invoices for the historical societies and museums that were now our biggest clients. He'd left his nonprofit and brought his sharp legal mind to our family business. Not the one his father had built on abstract numbers, but the one I had built on tangible truths. He looked up from his computer and caught my eye, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. It was a smile I hadn't seen in years, and it was like watching a faded photograph slowly return to its original vibrant color. "Mom," he called out, his voice clear and confident, "the New York Public Library just confirmed. They want us to bid on the entire Whitman collection, the digital restoration and preservation." My heart gave a little skip. The Whitman collection, it was the Everest of my field. A thrill, a real, unadulterated jolt of pure joy ran through me. "Get the proposal ready," I said, a grin spreading across my face. "We're going to win it." He just nodded, his own eyes shining with pride, and turned back to his work. There was an ease between us now, a quiet, powerful partnership forged in the wreckage of our old family. We didn't need to talk about what had happened. We were too busy building what came next. Later that afternoon, after the students had left, I was standing at my main light table. On one side, I had an original 19th century ambrotype, a portrait of a family. It was a beautiful, tragic little artifact. The glass was cracked, a spiderweb of damage running right through the mother's face. The emulsion was peeling away, and the children's faces were faded, almost ghost-like. It was broken, neglected, forgotten, a dusty fire hazard, some might say. Next to it, on my high-resolution monitor, was the final, restored version. I had spent weeks on it. I digitally repaired the crack, stitch by painstaking stitch. I'd rebuilt the mother's gentle smile from the few undamaged pixels that remained. I'd coaxed the children's faces back from the chemical haze of time, revealing the spark in their eyes, the smudge of dirt on one boy's cheek. The family was whole again. Their story, their truth, was saved. I held up the original, the broken glass cool against my fingertips, and looked at the new, perfect image on the screen. A new original. It was the same family, the same moment, but all the damage, all the years of neglect, had been erased. What was left was the truth of what it was always meant to be, strong, clear, and timeless. I thought of Marcus and Sloane. I heard they were living somewhere in Florida, in a rented condo, their names and reputations a permanent stain they could never quite wash away. They were a cracked, fading photograph, a story of decay, but I felt no satisfaction in it. They were simply a part of the past, an old archive I no longer needed to consult. My focus was on the new image, the restored one. I had taken the broken pieces of my own life and, with patience and skill and a refusal to be erased, I had built something stronger, something better. My work, my son, my name, my truth, and it was an asset beyond any valuation they could ever have comprehended.